For some people, the idea of death is terrifying. After all, no one really knows what happens once we take that leap into the great beyond. For others, it's an intriguing concept that breeds speculation on things like the afterlife, resurrection, and the ideas of heaven and hell. One thing we can probably all agree on, however, is that as awful and final as it would be to die, there are things in this world that would be far worse. A life of pain, endless servitude, or constant torment are all things that many of us consider to be far more unpleasant than simply kicking the bucket. And so, for this list, we're looking at fates in video gaming that would be much worse than biting the big one. Fair warning, viewers, not only will we be looking at some pretty rubbish ways to live your life, but we'll be entering spoiler territory for several of these games. So caution to all ye who enter. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 video game fates worse than death. Number 10. The Infinite Loop Ending, Layers of Fear. Of all the different things that characters on this list have to endure, the infinite loop ending of Layers of Fear is by far the least bad, but it would still completely suck, and it is much worse than the other two endings on offer. Overall, the protagonist in Layers of Fear doesn't really have a great time. Driven mad by the loss of his family and obsessed with creating his magnum opus, the work that will define his career, he wanders through his dilapidated house collecting materials and experiencing dreadful hallucinations. Throughout the game, the artist revisits his workshop and adds additional layers to his painting, which remains distorted for most of the runtime. The endings which most players will get sees him add the final layer, at which point the painting becomes a portrait of a beautiful woman, presumably his wife, before morphing into a grotesque visage. He then takes the painting and tosses it into a room of almost identical ones before heading back downstairs and starting again. The heartbreaking thing is that prior to getting back to work, doomed to start the cycle all over, we see that the paintings aren't disfigured at all. The distortion's all brought on by the artist's mind, and it's somewhat depressing to know that, without help, he'll be stuck in this loop forever. Number 9. HUEY'S Fate, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Now, just because a character ends up with a fate that is arguably worse than death, it doesn't necessarily follow that they didn't deserve it, as is the case for Metal Gear Solid 5's Dr. Huey Emmerich. He stands accused of a plethora of crimes, all of which he's completely guilty of. In need of a test subject, he forced his own son, Hal, into the cockpit of a Metal Gear. When his wife was none too pleased about this, as one would be, and sent Hal off to America, Huey sealed her inside the mammal pod and left her to suffocate. Huey was also an accomplice in the attack on Mother Base, conspired with Skullface, and was responsible for the leak at the quarantine facility resulting in the Wolbachia mutation. As punishment for his numerous wrongdoings, this all-round less-than-stellar dude ends up exiled on a small life raft with food and water, but with little hope of ever reaching dry land, and every possibility that he'll simply starve to death. He does eventually make it back to civilization and remarries. However, upon finding out that his new wife is having an affair with his son, he drowns himself in a pool. Shame. Number 8. GALENS' Dark Side Fate, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. Poor Galen Marek, he really doesn't have the best time of it throughout Star Wars: The Force Unleashed. Taken from his home at a young age by Darth Vader after his father was murdered by the sand-hating ratbag, then forced to train as his young apprentice until such a time that the Emperor got sick of him and had Vader throw him out of a window. Nightmare, I tell ya. He does get something of a redemption throughout the game, helping to rally the Rebel Alliance in order to bring down the Galactic Empire. He is, however, doing this at Vader's behest so that the latter may overthrow the Emperor. However, later in the game, he does get the option to truly align to the light side of the Force by sacrificing himself for the cause. Naturally, when there's the opportunity to be good, there's also the opportunity to be bad, and should players choose the dark side ending for Marek, he will kill Vader, then, whilst trying to attack the Emperor, he'll be crushed by his spaceship. As though that weren't enough, Marek survives this thanks to the Emperor himself, who has his body fused with armor so that he can go on serving the wrinkly toe rag until he finds someone better. How motivational. Number 7. Widowmaker's Fate, Overwatch. The ragtag group of characters that is the Overwatch roster have a whole smorgasbord of backstories that vary from triumphant and inspiring to downright traumatic. One who's on the latter end of the scale is the sniping femme fatale Widowmaker. Born Amélie Guillard, Widowmaker grew up in her family's ancestral home of Chateau Guillard. She trained as a ballet dancer, for which she became renowned, and later married Overwatch agent Gerard Lacroix. When the terrorist organization Talon failed to eliminate Gerard, they instead turned their attentions to his wife, who was kidnapped and subjected to intense neural reconditioning, suppressing her personality and transforming her into a sleeper agent. She was soon found by Overwatch seemingly unharmed and returned to her normal life. Soon after, however, she killed Gerard in his sleep and returned to Talon, where she was mutated, effectively becoming a living weapon. Amelie was trained in the covert arts and subjected to physiology-altering procedures that slowed her heart and turned her skin blue, forever transforming her into the assassin Widowmaker. Though she has been seen visiting her late husband's grave, Widowmaker is no longer capable of feeling human emotions, leaving her nothing more than an empty shell with a proficiency in killing. Number 6. The Apes' Curse, The Legend of Spyro, Dawn of the Dragon. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that the Dragon Malefor of the Legend of Spyro Dawn of the Dragon fame is one nasty git. However, even we were shocked to learn of the punishment he bestowed upon the apes following their betrayal. I mean, I'm all for deterring people from disloyalty, but this really does take the biscuit. After his exile from the realms, Malefor recruited an army of apes, promising them power and revenge on the dragon race and teaching them to harness the spirit gems, the dragon's life force. Since they were only serving him out of their own greed and lust for power, however, Malefor saw it fit to punish them for their disloyalty, turning them into undead ghouls forever cursed to remain in the shadows, hungering for the energy of others but never able to be sated. Their fate is so disturbing, in fact, that when told of it, Spyro and Cinder look utterly horrified. Don't worry guys, you're not the only ones. I mean, we know they were only in the whole alliance for themselves, but this seems a little harsh. Surely just cursing them to hate the taste of bananas would be better, right? Number 5. Becoming a Nobody, Kingdom Hearts series. If you're a celebrity, becoming a nobody is probably one of the worst things that could happen to your career, but as upsetting as fading into obscurity would be for someone used to the limelight, it's certainly not worse than being dead. If you live in the world of Kingdom Hearts, however, becoming a nobody is definitely a fate worse than death. Nobodies are born when their heart is swallowed by darkness and creates a heartless, a physical manifestation of the darkness within people's hearts. If the individual is strong-willed enough, they continue on as a nobody, retaining an appearance similar to what they had in life. Unlike Heartless, nobodies are intelligent and able to think for themselves, so rather than attacking purely on instinct, they are able to plan and strategize. Aside from being the embodiment of evil, it's said that nobodies cannot feel human emotion, and whilst they can mimic emotional responses to situations, they don't actually have any feelings. That said, there are some sources that say that nobodies can feel a mixture of emptiness and self-doubt, but no matter what they do, they'll never be able to feel complete owing to their lack of a heart. Christ, I almost feel sorry for them. Not quite that. Number 4. GLADOS' Fate, Portal series. Owing to the fact that she's a complete psychopath, we don't have much in the way of sympathy for Portal's antagonist GLADOS when she reveals what happened to her following the events of the first game. It turns out that rather than simply being destroyed, GLADOS found that she's equipped with a sort of black box feature that preserved the last 2 minutes of her life. When she's inadvertently reactivated by Chell and Wheatley at the beginning of Portal 2, she tells the pair of the feature, which was included so that in the event of some sort of catastrophic failure, the scientists would be able to recover her black box in order to determine just what had gone wrong. Unfortunately for GLADOS, this meant that she was stuck in this state between the 2 games, forced to relive her last moments and her death repeatedly. Considering that we know there is a gap of anywhere between 50 to 50,000 years between the 2 games, this means that she's been forced to experience death no fewer than 13 million times, up to as many as 13 billion times. And we all thought just having to do it once was rough. Number 3. Becoming a headcrab zombie, Half-Life series. Although it's highly likely that quick death by headcrab would probably be quite unpleasant, it's probably still preferable to becoming a host to one of these parasitic alien creatures. Found throughout the Half-Life series, headcrabs are 4-legged parasites that instinctively attack humans and take control of their bodies. They do this by leaping at their victim, which they can do from a staggering 10 feet away, then attaching to their skull, cracking it open, and using some sort of hoodoo to convert them into a zombie. Throughout the horrifying process, the host remains alive and to some extent, conscious. Their body will also be mutated by the headcrab, so victims can expect to lose a good amount of skin and muscle tissue, potentially even to the point that their internal organs become exposed. The creatures are so effective at neutralizing human enemies that the Combine even made attempts to weaponize them by placing hordes of headcrabs into mortar shells and dropping them on resistance bases. The only trouble is that their alliance is only to themselves, and unfortunately for anyone who does try to use them as a weapon, they're just as likely to attack you as they are your enemies. Yikes. Number 2. Lisa Trevor's Fate, Resident Evil Remake. Of all of the entries on this list, there are probably none as undeserving of their tragic fate as Lisa Trevor. Lisa was the daughter of George Trevor, one of the architects that designed the famous Spencer Mansion. Upon its completion, the family were invited to the mansion under the ruse of becoming permanent guests within the estate. Arriving before George, Lisa and her mother Jessica were detained by Spencer's men and taken down to the laboratories below the mansion where they became test subjects for Umbrella's research on the progenitor virus. After it became clear that Jessica's body was having no reaction to the treatments, Umbrella had her executed as she was no further use to them alive. Sadly, Lisa's body began to mutate and she was slowly driven insane by her isolation and the effects that the progenitor virus was having on her. For over 30 years she remained this way, until the STARS unit encountered her whilst investigating the mansion in 1998. Though they attempted to neutralize her, the mutations prevented them from doing so, and she was only finally given the sweet release of death when the mansion exploded. Rest in peace, dear Lisa. You've certainly earned it. Number 1. Prometheus' fate, God of War 2. It's fair to say that the ancient Greeks were a pretty gnarly bunch of dudes and dudettes, and this radical attitude towards life is very often reflected in their mythology, which largely focuses on a whole bunch of incredibly flawed gods and all of the ways that they exact revenge on people. One such unlucky idiot was Prometheus, a titan who is probably best known for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind like an absolute champ. In God of War 2, Kratos encounters Prometheus chained to the hand of Typhon, a white eagle eating his entrails. Prometheus explains that when he stole the fires of Olympus, big lad Zeus wasn't best pleased about it, and the Titan was sentenced to remain in chains for all eternity, his insides pecked out each day by an eagle and regrown at night. Since Zeus is already in Kratos' bad books, what with the whole stabbing incident at the beginning of the game, he's more than happy to oblige Prometheus' request to let him die, releasing him from his bonds and allowing him to fall into the fire below. It's a shame to see such an all-round good guy meet an awful end, but when you think about the torment he's already had to endure, it's probably for the best, isn't it?